Thank you for having me. Thank you all for coming out. I hope this will be instructive for your offices. Hopefully, the beneficiaries ultimately are your students. I and my staff have been helping students. Our direct job is with test prep. We dig in with whatever comes to us, whether somebody wants an SAT or somebody wants an ACT prep or somebody wants subject tests or just academic tutoring. But I want to today help everyone here with this decision that could be a big one. I hope to say that it might not be such a big, daunting decision, and I'll show you why. But I'm sure a lot of your offices are afflicted right now with students and maybe parents. What do we do? How do we keep up with this? So let me hopefully help on the road to keeping up really well now that the SAT and the ACT have changed. The ACT has not changed much. There are three minimal ones. They have not changed our sense of how you prep, and thus I do consider the ACT the consistent test among between the two. I do want to address why either of these, ACT or SAT, is worthy, that it's something that students should have on front and center if they're looking for a competitive four-year college. And there are many who are not. And unfortunately, those are swept into maybe a frenzy that they shouldn't be part of. If they know they are destined for starting at Tunx's Community College, starting at Porter and Chester, starting at a technical school that does not require either of these tests, they shouldn't be doing this. And leave it to the students who are trying to charge up to get that four-year coveted admission. Let them be in a really differentiatable category. And I think many schools don't make that differentiation, and they sort of afflict other people, students, with it. Now, one reason for, no matter who you are, maybe going at hardcore SAT or ACT prep is the benefit beyond college and for life. And that's why I've never been ashamed to be part of a bad industry. I'm here because I think the SAT and the ACT measure good things. They are good things beyond college. When you can help with expanding vocabulary, went the wrong way. When you can help with expanding vocabulary, when you can help with better grammar, that's more than just college admissions. Enhance your essay writing. Unfortunately, that's been downplayed lately on those tests, but that may be the most important thing, especially for a student geared towards a liberal arts next 4 years. Stronger math, improved reasoning. The SAT once called itself the reasoning test, and there are elements of reasoning that somehow are coached at times in school. But when outside of school, a student is being geared up for SAT's reasoning within math, within the reading, and reason from it, that's something that an awful lot of college professors are going to want to reward, seeing that reasoning in their classroom and on papers that students present. So I do think both of these are wholesome tests. And if anything, schools shouldn't be downplaying them because they are coinciding with the things that your high school desires to teach. These are not separated tests that are taking away from school. If schools, and particularly guidance professionals within schools, embrace that this is a measure of skills, and even the process of building up your skills is good for not only admission but for life, I think you have a better sense of preparation and less anxiety overall. Here's the financial benefit. The financial benefit to a good SAT or ACT score is bigger than ever before. A lot of students come to my firm without the desire for a high-end bumper sticker, but a high amount that they're going to receive every year for 4 years. And the SAT is the biggest bringer of that. There's a lot of scholarships out there beyond SAT. There's a lot of planning. Charles's firm is going to help a lot of people with planning well for savings. But one of the best savings you can do, because you don't have to pay back these things. These are not loans. These are grants, and you know them, that colleges, if you're not looking at the tippy top tier, but you have a big enough score to get into a Cornell, you don't want to go to Cornell. You are willing to go to not such an elite school where there's good money coming back. Well, that's the best benefit for most families that an SAT score or an ACT score can deliver. Our survey, we just started 2 years ago with asking how much money is being awarded when after all your applications are done, and we're now over $70,000 in an average 4-year award. Those of you who counsel in less affluent districts, I think you're the ones who have been, you have to be, sensitive to need. You have a sense of affordability in the first place, and even if a kid can get in with lots of loans, you are the ones who have to counsel about here's how it's going to be for paying back these loans. And a 17-year-old doesn't necessarily want to fathom, what am I going to be doing at age 25? I didn't know what grad school even was at age 17. So whether a grad school gives you loan deferment or not, those are big questions to wrestle with. And those of you who counsel at more affluent schools, I hope there is a financial element to your counseling, at least with the parents. Kids often don't know whether parents have savings, whether there's a 529 plan in place, whether income. They don't know if they're being expected to work their school year. Those of you who are bringing that up in your counseling, I think you're doing a tremendous job, and I wish more counselors would do that. Students tend to care about success, even on these tests, when they translate. When the success is clearly translated towards, there's a financial reward for me or my family. Or there's that nice bumper sticker that says Amherst to me or my family on the car. The students, I don't think, are against excelling on a standard that's good. Unfortunately, they hear that, well, we don't understand why the SAT is a standard in the first place. And I think you all know that colleges need an SAT or an ACT or some standard. Both of these could change again in the end of the decade. But some standard to help equate the kid who got a 3.7 in this suburban school. And how does that equate to a kid with a 3.9 at an urban school, at a rural school, or homeschooled where there's not even a GPA? There's going to be a standard, at least among the more elite schools, the more competitive schools, whether that's an SAT, which may or may not survive, or an ACT, which may take other forms, or something totally different. Colleges need that standard. And students, I think generally, if they know the stuff they're doing is meaningful, are happy to meet and exceed that standard. Let's get into that real topic about these two standards, the SAT or the ACT. And I want to ask a question of you. Please raise your hand if right now in your school counseling you do steer towards one or the other. At least on occasion you steer kids towards one or the other. How many in that category? Not too many. All right? I do steer. And it has changed, and it is certainly a kid-by-kid basis. I hope after leaving this, maybe more of you will raise your hand and say, yeah, I'm willing to steer. When the tests were significantly different, all of 9 months ago, we had a way to steer that was generally based on a student's performance on practice tests. And we had to ask students, very few would comply, but take one of each. Ideally, take 2 of each. The books, the official SAT study guide, the real ACT prep guide, allowed students to really measure themselves. We asked students to do this scientifically, 4 mornings in a row, where you would get up and do an ACT one morning, the next morning you'd get up and do a practice SAT, repeat on Wednesday and Thursday. How many people actually did this? Very few. Very few. There aren't many teenagers willing to do that. Now that the tests have become so much closer, this is not advice that I'm eager to give. I'll still throw it out there if you really, really want to assess yourself. However, the assessments are going to end up pretty darn close. After doing 4 tests back to back to back to back, I think kids are going to end up being able to scale and yet seeing almost no difference. And so putting a teenager through that kind of effort is something we no longer encourage them to do. So we have new advice. And the new advice is pretty simple. Look at how similar the tests are in the first place. I've got an ACT screen coming up next. It's not going to look very different. Our 4 SAT components as of March 2016, reading, with a little science in there, writing and language, we like to call that English, math without calculator, math with calculator, and then there's an essay that's optional at the end. ACT, almost the same. Reading, writing and language, we call it English. Math, always with a calculator, not a big deal. Science, but not science in the manner of you need to be a physics goddess to be able to excel. If you didn't take Biology 101 at our school, you're going to fail on the ACT science. That's never been the case. The ACT science is truly science reasoning. It's giving students an experiment that almost nobody would have ever seen before. Whether your textbook was Prentice Hall or Harvard, there is no advantage to having been in a biology course or not, because the experiment the students are going to grapple with is going to be one that nobody should have seen before. They give, here's an example, the spread of volcanic ash 1, 2, 3, 4 days after a volcanic eruption in Oregon. And where would the spread likely deposit the most ash? And they ask about changes in case the wind speed picked up, or what would happen if rain caused more ash to fall in a certain area. Analyzing causes and effects is not the realm necessarily of a scientist. Good lawyers, almost any student with reasoning can work through the science section. So long as they're not afraid of science, this still should be a welcome section for students. So notice how close these 2 tests are. There are a few, I think they're pretty minute, and they're very minute if a student chooses to get coached. Coach herself or be coached. The differences make it even smaller. So here comes some of the differences. I'll get to that. These are the more minute differences between ACT and SAT. The SAT does have more intricate reading questions. The passages themselves, they seem to still be deliberately more esoteric. They like taking things from the 1920s. 90 years ago, our English language was significantly different, yet they expect students to hang with that. Sometimes they'll take you back to 1853 for a Dickens passage. The SAT's questions on reading might be a little bit more intricate too. Their answer choices, one is just a nuance different from the other. Whereas the ACT's reading seems to be more straightforward, and the differences among the 4 choices are pretty clear-cut. If you knew what you read, you're going to get the ACT question. If you don't even know what you read, you can usually find it, but it's an open book test. You can find that answer. And so when students are coached or coach themselves to doing that kind of work, the ACT reading is not very daunting. Higher level vocabulary. The SAT has a little more of it. Not like before, when up until January they had sentence completions, 19 questions that were directly testing vocabulary. And if you didn't have a high level vocabulary, you started like 120 points worse, compared to somebody who did have a high-level vocabulary. Now it's a little hard to quantify just how much worse, but we still know that having a better enhanced vocabulary will help within the SAT reading. And it could help a little on the essay at the end of the SAT, but it's not being directly tested. So SAT, yes, testing vocabulary, but not in a hard way that should scare people. I like to encourage people, not scare them, to do vocabulary anyway. It's good for life. But I'm not saying you absolutely must do it to get a 700 on the SAT. Look at the big advantage on ACT on the math, that it is closer to the school textbooks, whereas the SAT math has more tricky math. And I'll give an example of that the English is kind of convoluted, that your student may be really good at math and get hurt by the English aspect of math. By the way, I am going to take questions, and I'll do it probably in 10 more minutes. If people have questions, I'd like to do it anonymously, so that if you wanted to hold up your hand with a card or a piece of paper that I will take, Michelle or Gus can take them up to me, and that way you can ask anonymously. Nobody needs to know where it's coming from. So feel free to use that. I promise Q&A time. The tricky element of math still exists on the SAT. And in one way, it might have gotten worse, because the new SAT has lengthier word problems. The always been there element of tricky math is just the way they use English to ask what the ACT would make into a straightforward question. The SAT might say something like this: which of the following falsifies the proposition that two prime numbers always sum to another prime? Proposition? Falsifies? These are words that a lot of kids don't appreciate from their English. And here it is on a math question. They know the math, they understand prime numbers, but they still might not get it right because of the call of the question. So, while that could be a big differentiator, with coaching, it's not, okay? Kids can work on this themselves. We in our classes work on good coaching so that you can decipher and just be ready for math that is not as straightforward. At that point, the difference between ACT math and SAT math is minuscule, and if anything, the ACT actually has a higher level of math. So I like to put it this way. ACT math is not necessarily harder, but it will take it to a higher level. There will be higher level exponents tested. There's likely on the ACT to be a logarithm question. There's likely to be a matrix question. None of those are asked on the current SAT's math. There's a little bit of trigonometry on both, a little bit more on the ACT. So what do you do if your student hasn't had trigonometry or these high-level questions? I still don't think you are strongly better off or worse off, because you work on those things in the process of boning up for your ACT or SAT. So I'm not saying I'm leaving 5 questions on the table. You didn't have trigonometry yet. You're taking your ACT this winter. Too bad for those 5 questions. No, I want you to get all 5 of those right. That can raise your score on the ACT 2 full points. On the SAT, that could raise your score 60 points on the SAT if there were 5 questions. So I want you to go for that. But I don't think that should be a reason for steering yourself from one to the other. Couple other things that actually balance out, they don't really balance out. The full science section, ACT, yes, it has it. If kids are willing to do battle, they're not phobic about science, then I feel that they should go at the ACT. It might be a source of advantage to them doing the science section. An equating section, that's what some people term experimental. The SAT has it. I don't think it deters or attracts any sort of student whether they have an extra 30 minutes to work. That's what they're faced on the SAT, but not the ACT. It's a section that is not counted towards anyone's score. The SAT makers need it to try to balance one test and try to make it equivalent to another test. So it's a good thing to have. ACT has done without it, but that shouldn't be a reason for choosing one over the other. Both have essays. Both are optional. Fewer and fewer colleges seem to care about the essays anymore. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Super scoring, there's an advantage still for the SAT. And that used to be a big reason for us to steer kids towards the SAT as long as the kid was willing to take the SAT twice. Now, most students should be willing to take it 3 or 4 times. Anytime you're taking a test a second time, super scoring is advantageous. You're almost certainly not going to get the exact same score on 2 sections. So super scoring means you have an inherent upside and no downside. ACT has kind of lagged in college acceptance of it. It's been 50% of colleges. I think it's moved up to maybe 55. But I do think it's going to be moving up even this winter. I think more and more colleges are just going to say, look, we're going to take kids for the best they show us. We're doing it now with the SAT. Why not do it with the ACT? So though that looks like a big disparate statistic, I think the ACT is going to come closer to even, and that shouldn't be a big deal. With all these minute things, what's the advantage, what's the disadvantage? I'm going to, I'll go to the previous one. The puppy. I think the difference between analyzing the ACT versus the SAT is outweighed by the randomness on a single testing day of whether one of your 5 reading comp passages has something that you really like as a topic and something that you really abhor. They gave me a passage about puppies, and I got 11 out of 11 right. This is about Sputnik and space trials, and I hate that, and you get 5 out of 11 right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a 60-point difference. That itself may be no different than whether you've chosen ACT versus SAT. Again, because things have converged so closely, I don't think you have a really strong difference. I'll give you 3 now, and this is now the simple. The simple test that we see that should be helpful to you and your students. 3 questions. Is my vocabulary strong? Am I afraid of science? And that doesn't necessarily mean, am I good or bad at science? Am I afraid and I don't want to deal with it? Okay, that's a reason for moving towards the SAT. But if you're willing to grapple, do battle with science, this should be a no, I'm not afraid. Do I adapt to tricky math? And that's not even, am I good at it, but am I willing to and able to adapt? If taught tricky math, through a guide, through a coach, can I get better at it? If the answer there is yes, I adapt to tricky math, and the answer to the above 2 questions, yes, I am afraid of science, yes, my vocabulary is strong. 3 yeses is the one type of kid who may be well served by only doing the SAT. A no on either of these, I would take the ACT. I'm not saying in lieu of SAT, it might be in addition to SAT. Literally, the ACT, if you're studying for it, you're covering all the grounds of the SAT, except the essay. You're covering all the things that the SAT covers anyway. So in the process of studying for the ACT, you end up arming yourself pretty well for the SAT also. I think you all know that colleges don't care if they see scores from both or multiple scores. They give kids the benefit of the best score they see. So it makes sense if a student has the time to go after the ACT. It takes a little more time to study, but then you're plunking yourself down on 1 or 2 other Saturdays to go at the SAT and giving yourself more chances of the admission success, more chances of the financial success. I have one other reason moving towards ACT, and it's because of the scheduling of the SAT subject tests. This is overlooked by a lot of people. The students who need or want to show good success on the subject tests. Now remember, that's only going to be applicable to maybe 50 or 60 universities. They tend to be the top tier universities. But when a student wants to take the subject tests, unfortunately, they have to really be concerned about when their SAT will be scheduled, because these subject tests are scheduled on the same day, and you can't take both in the same day. You wouldn't want to anyway. So you as counselors really need to plan with your students. Our favorite time to do subject tests usually is May and June. They're coming near the end of a course that they've presumably done well in, and so near the end of that course, they're studying for finals anyway. They have learned almost all they're going to learn in that course, so May and June seem to be a very apt time for subject tests. But then that presumes that if you're taking the ACT, you don't have to do it in May and June. You've done it in March or earlier, or you're willing to wait until senior year. I don't like waiting till senior year, but sometimes that's unavoidable. Last topic, then I'll open up to questions. The coachability of the essays. So that's the less important element, and it's gotten lower. In part because the SAT and the ACT have not given clear messages to you or to colleges about whether they care or how much they care. So students realistically say, I don't know why I'm doing this. We think it's relatively coachable stuff to excel on a 50-minute essay, or on the ACT, it's a 40-minute essay. It's more coachable in a shorter time than coaching math for the ACT, or coaching reading for SAT or ACT. So though the payoff is not going to happen at many universities, if a student plans to apply to even one university that requires or desires essay, then it seems to make sense for a student to then go at it hard. You know, get that top tier score, the equivalent of a 700 or better. On the new SAT scale, that's changed around. 24 is now the perfect essay score. A 700 equates to about a 21. On the ACT, 12 is again a perfect score. They had a bad period in between. And a 10, 11, or a 12 puts you in the 700 plus category. So here, the essays are not the old essays from a year and a half ago. They have changed on both counts. The SAT, significantly longer, no opinion desired. They really want analysis. And the kind of analysis that seems to be desired is stuff that you get in a rhetoric class. How many kids take rhetoric? It's 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds. Almost nobody. I didn't take a class like that. I went to a good prep school. I think I took a little bit of rhetoric in law school. How they expect students to do this task, I don't understand. The ACT is a little more pragmatic. This is the ACT essay, a little shorter. 3 perspectives for students to evaluate, and they welcome your opinion. Students are meant to give an opinion. Which of these perspectives is more persuasive? Along the way, both essays want to see a student using good vocabulary, proper grammar. Is the student clear? Those are overall hallmarks. Here's the scoring. I'd rather not get into this. And here's the bottom line, though. These essays are quite coachable in a short amount of time. And by the way, I don't consider coachable a dirty word. If something is worth learning, you have soccer coaches to coach kids to play soccer better. We have coaches called science teachers in every one of your schools that are coaching kids for proficiency in experimentation and reasoning and science knowledge. What's wrong with coaching if the standard you're coaching to is good? The downside of these essays is that fewer and fewer colleges seem to be putting weight on the essays. So it's too bad, because I think a liberal arts-oriented college ought to welcome an impromptu essay, not a highly coached one, an impromptu because no adult can help in the 40 minutes that you have to do the essay, showing a kid's writing and reasoning and analytical ability. It seems to me one of the most practical things they could look for, yet fewer and fewer colleges seem to care. I am open to questions. I still have more to talk about at the end, especially about scheduling of tests. And I do have a little comment about the SAT as a test day in schools test. So I'm not done, but I'm open to questions. If you're not afraid, you can belt it out. If you want to give it to Gus, Michelle, just hold up a hand. They can bring questions over to me, and I'll take them on. But did this raise anything thus far that you'd like to see addressed? Yes?
Is there, when you're working with students with learning challenges, is there one that is easier for them to show their level of, academic strength over the other?
It's a good question. My number one litmus test, which test will give you the extended time? Okay? If it's a learning challenge kid who can get extended time from the ACT but not the SAT, you go that route. If it's the other way around, you go that route. All things being equal, from afar, I have a slight lean toward, this is a tough call, because the ACT is a little bit more straightforward, but there are two very fast-paced sections. The end of the ACT has the reading comp, which is a furiously fast pace to get it all done, and the science is at a very fast pace to get it all done. So when coached, or if self-coached and diligent about it, I guess I have a slight lean towards the ACT, because I think you get over those timing barriers. You take practice tests, you get better at it. So I have a slight lean on the ACT. Others? Any from the, I didn't get any notices up here. Oh, I do. Thank you. All right. Thank you. This is close to your question. Does our choice of ACT or SAT differ for international students? In one way, yes. International students often have very good math abilities, better than your average American students. I think you know that. But here's an SAT now that's making a lengthy word problem where the English is making a big disposition on their math success. So unless a student has the English proficiency to work on those problems well, that student might be a little better off on the ACT. The other, why are 95% of colleges superscoring the ACT versus only 55% for the ACT? It's a goofy reason, because the ACT said so. Literally, the ACT has given as its guidance, we don't think it should be superscored. And colleges are listening to it. Yet at the same time, they're superscoring, 95% of them, the SAT without batting an eye. It doesn't make sense when colleges who superscore are deliberately giving students the benefit of the best score they see from a student with multiple submissions, and not doing it with the 4-part ACT. They can handle 4. It's not hard to take the best science and the best reasoning. I don't understand it. I do think that's going to be fading because colleges are distrusting a lot of things that are coming down from DC or from Iowa City ACT. I think that mistrust of authority is good. And I think colleges will come, literally in this year, to more and more say, we want to assess all the information, let's have students at their best. So I do hope that'll change. I think it's moving that way. Any others? Yes? Okay, so there are correlation tables, and they have been stagnant for the last 10 years. That's good and bad. The correlation table, you've seen them before? Okay, so they have not moved even though we think they should. And we've had no official correlation of the new SAT, whether an 1100 still equals a 23. It looks like it does from the old tables, and unless this gets revised in the next 4 months, that's what the colleges are going to be using. They're going to be using these, I think, blunt and not truly worked through tables. And the reason why the SAT probably can't do it yet, they have traditionally needed a full year of testing to really assess the caliber of students who take the March test versus students who take the December test. March tends to be a high caliber group. They tend to be the most well-prepared students and deserve to have above average scores coming out of it. And the SAT used to reward that. If, they were well prepared, they get the high number, they weren't being pushed down based on a curve that was tough. December was often the worst, the weakest pool of kids. It's a lot of kids who, at the last minute they're a senior. Yeah, I guess my mom said I should apply to college, so I'll take this test. So you don't have a really engaged kid taking it senior year December, and deservedly the scores from December were lower. Over the course of a full year, we might get more meaningful tables, but for now I think you got to stick with the tables that you're beset with. Let me talk about statewide assessments. Because with all these problems that the SAT has created itself, okay, we didn't do this. Some states, ours is one of them, are embracing it rather than, in my mind, keeping it at bay. School day test for the SAT, I think, is useless. There are 7 or 8 other opportunities for kids to ramp up for an SAT to show themselves college admissions abilities. To foist an SAT on many kids who shouldn't be taking it in the first place, they're not bound for 4-year colleges, to take teachers time out. You know how precious the time is, that your colleagues, I suspect, don't like going to workshops that are inspired by Common Core teaching when they're good and they know when students aren't learning well. You don't need a statewide assessment to figure out that that kid can read well and this kid can't read as well and that kid can do math proficiently and that kid can't. Who needs this? I've been saying this at the lower levels for a long time, and now it's moved up to, isn't this sufficient to do it in the high school arena? It is inefficient. It's asking students to be guinea pigs for some administrator in Diana Wenzel's office. They are onto that themselves. Students don't necessarily want to play in that playpen, and so you're not even getting the most meaningful results from school day SAT testing. I'm a lonely voice. But to the extent that you have clout within your schools and there's a way to object to this, I think it would be wise. It is a true ugly. The old SAT, I love. Okay, it's not that old. It's 10 months old now. We could go back to it. That was a test that really helped colleges discern something other than achievement. Something about reasoning, resourcefulness was tested quite well on the SAT up until January of this year. And it was something that colleges revered. And then the SAT makers kind of it's a lie when they went and said, well, colleges have told us we want different standards. It's not true. They wanted different standards so they could sell their test to commissioners state by state by state. And Connecticut, unfortunately, has bought in. I hope it doesn't stay in that long. The assessment itself, I don't think is that fruitful. The SAT will say, well, there's some elements of math that we call heart of algebra. And then there's something called passport to advanced math. I don't know what they mean. I look over these questions and I can't tell where the dividing line is. And even if I could, I couldn't tell your esteemed math teacher how to coach to this any better than that. Just teach math. Instead of going to all these workshops, take your time to take kids at a remedial level and teach them at their level. Find other kids who are higher level and teach them at their level. This is it's a bureaucratic, I think, dumbing down. Okay, there are very few school districts in this state that need remediation. Okay, very few. And yet, by buying into statewide assessments, you are putting yourselves into this blah category instead of being able to excel. I wrote an article about math tyranny. What I meant by that was, one of those so-called standards is being made up by whoever in Common Core thinks that doing math this way is important. And there are a lot of kids who are going to be very successful in life were it not for an impediment of getting through certain math that's being tested for no good reason. I've run 3 businesses, and I've never needed math beyond 6th grade math. Yet at now every level, it seems like they're asking for trigonometry. Have any of you used trigonometry in the last decade? You don't need it. And yet this has become a useless standard that we're slowly just kind of sucking up. I hope there can be a rebellion against this, and letting your students flourish without math tyranny, I think, will be a very helpful thing for their well-being and helpful thing for pretty much your well-being in counseling. I'm not moving on very well. Let's see if this works. Next. That worked. Not many school teachers involved in Common Core math. Anyone want to guess the number? There were 27, that's the hint, professionals when they devised the Common Core math standards nationally. Anyone want to guess how many were actual school teachers? 0. Yeah, 0. Okay? Your teachers know math far better than bureaucrats in Washington, and to have the hubris of, this is a standard now. It's not a standard. Standards take time to develop. Maybe 10 years from now we'll embrace it and it is a standard. Until then, it's not a very good standard. Let me finish with what should be helpful about scheduling. How we can have our students, whether they're gearing up for top-tier schools, not so top-tier schools, scholarships or not. Not getting there. There we go. What to test, when to prep. By the way, this is a firm, little plug, I happen to be somewhat involved, but Education Excellence is a firm that actually advises schools on those very things, what to test, when to test, how to prep. They're like a brain trust for guidance offices. And if you're in an office where you can't afford to have somebody who only does financial aid and is really on top of it, and certainly 8 guidance counselors can't all be on top of it, but if even one of them don't have that ability, that's what this outside firm does. Also, if they have a desire to be up on gap year opportunities, who should take time off, who should be working while they're in school, that's something that's really hard to follow and more important to kids. An outside organization is probably good. Here's the essence. When should we schedule these tests? And I say we. I used to say, when should students schedule these tests? But the students are working with you. They are more reliant on you than ever before. Their parents can't keep up. There's so much information. You can't say just go to the internet and figure it out. No, they need your true guidance. So if there is a we're scheduling this test to work with your schedule. And I know you play football in this fall, but you're fairly light in the winter and the spring. That's a collaboration that I think is really going to be helpful so that nobody is caught at the end of the year with, oh, I haven't gotten the important tests. The AP is the easiest test to schedule, and not that many students need APs. There's no college I know of that requires an AP. No college. The benefit to showing a high AP score for admissions could exist, especially if you had a bad grade in physics. And it was because Mr. Murphy never liked me. But you show that you got a 4 or a 5 on the AP Physics, you now have the way to combat that in a college application. Let's say your overall grade in all the sciences has been low. But maybe that's because you're at a high school that deliberately grades low. You're on that old gentleman C type curve or close to it. And your way of showing that I know my stuff. This B- average is actually above average for my hard school or my hard Mrs. Calandro who grades really tough in biology. Because I just showed you a 5 on my AP biology test. If AP is not affordable, they are expensive, the low-hanging fruit, very affordable, is the SAT subject tests. And I like these tests. These have not changed. These 1-hour tests are available 6 times a year, and that is a way to boost your credentials on a national scale. And that's where I want to start on the scheduling. If you have to plan with a student who is taking SAT subject tests, I think you should consider May and June the times that will be subject test dates and work the other stuff around it. ACT and SAT would be hopefully earlier if it's in the junior year, maybe later and it has to be put off till senior year. I don't love that. Please remember the benefit of summer study. The benefit is huge because they can do study without being conflicted with school and driver ed and sports and all these other activities. And next year, the SAT offers a September test. So literally, end of summer for SAT and ACT will be available, and then kids can be done with that part of testing. Freshmen and sophomores can take SAT subject tests. Most of you realize that. I hope it comes to the forefront that if you're coming to the end of a biology class that you've done well in, freshman biology, it's still the best time to take it. Is May or June, maybe both, of your freshman year because you're not going back to biology again. Next year, your science is chemistry. So the other benefit with that early counseling to take an early test is just the practice with standardized tests. Then they don't become so daunting. All right, I've only got 2 minutes. I'll leave it to 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll turn it over. So, Charles, do I have 2 minutes? I do. Other questions that have come out of this? Yes?
I think it's a case of a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Parents want to know how many AP courses are you teaching in your, and that's how they decide what high school their students are going to go to. And then we have this put in front of us.
One nice thing is a student can take an AP test without taking the course for it. And frankly, if you can get a 4 without being in the AP course, that can look very impressive. And even if they were at a school that offered it, Avon High has like 17 different AP courses. But a lot of kids who might want AP computer science can't get it into their schedule because they got 2 other things. So they could still learn the computer science from their regular teacher, still take the test, and impress colleges that way. So I hope parents aren't that fretful over that. To me, there's a lot of other fretful things. But whether your school does or doesn't offer AP, I don't think that's an impediment to success. Others? Yes? They accept it in lieu of subject tests. Now, I don't think students should play to that. A few of them will say, oh, good, I don't have to take the subject test. But the subject tests are, as I said, the lowest hanging fruit. The easiest credential you can get for college is a 1-hour subject test in something that you're pretty good at. So my solution is if you have the ability on a good day to get a 700 in a subject, take it. Whether your college wants it or not, whether you're taking the ACT or the SAT, you could give them an easy-to-earn credential. By the way, how do you know whether you can get a 700 in a test? Good guide is called the Official Guide to SAT Subject Tests. I think Michelle has the ISBN number. It looks like the old College Board book. The Official Guide to SAT Subject Tests has one of each test that students can take and has a scoring table that allows you to say, oh, I did get a 720. I should be able to do this on test day as well. Does that answer your question? All right, let me call it a day for me. I'm around through lunch, so feel free. And Gus, if you could stand up, Michelle, if you could stand up. They've been my lieutenants for over 10 years, and they know a lot. So if on behalf of yourself, your school, or your students, you have other questions that you can't get to me on or don't even want to talk to me, these guys are equally friendly, equally knowledgeable, and happy to be around for you. So thank you again. Thank you. And next up. Thank you.